Yeah, it's actually very similar to, at the very beginning of this presentation, we mentioned Eleanor Ostrom, who wrote about the commons and how important points of commons that are successful are that they have to be community run and democratic and open and transparent and things like that. And Ostrom did not identify as a leftist or a socialist. Ostrom just did economic research, sociology research, and came to those conclusions based on observing the real world and looking at how capitalism versus more socialist societies work. In a sense, that was Marx, right? Like doing that economic analysis, you could see the problems with capitalism are at a very core issue. It's not those myths that we talked about. It's not just, well, people are greedy or people are corrupt or whatever. There's a fundamental problem with capitalism that comes out when you do the economic analysis. You don't have to call yourself a socialist. If you just analyze what's going on, you'll eventually reach those conclusions. This is what's playing out in front of us. So that's why Marx is considered such an important point in history, because that analysis is so core to understanding capitalism. And of course, capitalism has evolved since then, so we shouldn't be stuck on just that particular analysis. We have to keep evolving it and critiquing it and developing it, but that was a very important point in history. So because we have to keep developing it, you've seen these different tendencies develop in Marxism over time. And so especially after Marx and Engels had passed away, there was, of course, kind of a grappling over, well, where do we go from here, right? Like, who kind of inherits the movement, so to speak? Who's kind of the person that speaks for socialism? And especially as capitalism was evolving and industrialism was changing, and we started to move toward this more global, national, neoliberal sort of concept of capitalism that we live in today. Different figures came forward with different ideas on how to address it, how to evolve Marxist ideas. And so this is one of those slides that you could have a whole class, right, a whole live stream on. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but to emphasize that there were some that decided that capitalism, this more orthodox sort of thing, to try to stay more in line with Marx's original vision, argued that capitalism would eventually fail on its own. And so until then, the working class had to organize in political parties and stuff to try to do the best they could to improve conditions until capitalism failed and we could implement socialism.
They had to prepare for the collapse.
Yeah, prepare for the collapse, essentially, right?
They were the lefty preppers.
Right, exactly. So there are arguments on how to do that, how much you should focus on labor unions versus electoralism, and so you had kind of different wings in there on exactly what that means. But that's where a lot of modern labor parties and all came from. They kind of evolved from that concept of we have to prepare for it, and we can do that by getting involved in politics, involved in electoralism, as one method. You also had Leninism rise in Russia, which was like just completely replace what exists today and establish a new worker state under a new political party, like a whole new paradigm. Like don't try to play in the old. And so the Soviet Union inspired a lot of parties around the world too to instead of doing a more reformist approach of kind of we can get some changes here and there, you try to more systemically change, right, what the how the system works. And then finally you had I don't think they called themselves libertarians at the time, but you had another group of Marxists who were very critical of both the electoral Labor Party sort of strategy as well as what happened in the Soviet Union after the fall of the Tsar and creation of the Soviet Union. They were very critical of how authoritarian and top-down the Soviet Union had become, especially under Stalin and all. And so they were critical of those and instead argued that Marxism should take the form of this very anti-authoritarian, bottom-up sort of, very democratic organizing method. So you still kind of see a lot of those arguments in different socialist groups today about like how much should be, union work versus electoral work and, bottom up versus a more top down state approach. So these are all ongoing. So it's good to have kind of a sense that these conversations exist.